Hi, everyone. Welcome to Slate's Wednesday Night Live. Thank you for joining us. I'm Christina Cauterucci, a staff writer at Slate and host of the Slate podcast Outward. And tonight, I am honored to be joined by two of my most esteemed fellow Slate writers to talk about the Democratic vice presidential nominee, Kamala Harris. So from their respective homes, we have Julia Craven. Hi, Julia.
Hi.
And Ben Mathis-Lilly. Hi, Ben.
Hi, guys.
So before we jump into our conversation, if you're watching and you have a question for us, write it in the comments wherever you happen to be watching. I assume that's YouTube or Facebook. And we'll try to get to as many as we can later in the show. Stay on topic. I know you all want Ben's opinion on your tomato garden and Julia's thoughts on the WAP discourse, but we're all Harris all the time tonight. So let's keep it to that. So first off, you guys have been following the Democratic presidential race for too long now. And of course, we've been waiting for forever to see who Joe Biden would choose as his vice presidential candidate. Take me through your reaction to the news when it dropped yesterday afternoon, Julia.
Well, it's actually pretty funny because, so my therapist broke the news to me because I was in a virtual therapy appointment, and I wish I was making that up. And so I guess she had
that seems like the best
playing in the
possible
back.
place to receive political news.
Yeah.
It kind of stressed me out, but thankfully she's a good therapist and my editor is a good editor, and it was fine. But once I got out of that appointment and I was able to process it, I realized that I didn't have any, it felt too early for me to have concrete thoughts on it because I could only think about the discourse that she provokes. And so I ended up writing a piece about this, how Harris is a candidate. She's riveting, she's compelling. She's all of these things, but she also either makes people feel very grounded in their politics, or she is going to elicit a visceral opposition out of someone. And I just kind of focus on what I think the discourse is going to be and how ultimately I think it's a good thing that we're talking about this. I think it's good that people are going to be digging into her record even further. And I think it's nice that, we're going to be just on the internet more. I don't know. I actually don't think that part's nice.
Ben, what about you? What was your reaction?
It was kind of like, okay. As has been pointed out, like if you went back the 20 months that we've actually been doing this, and you had to guess what would the Democratic ticket look like in August of 2020, like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris would have been a really good So I felt like, okay, all right, that's what we kind of expected all along. It's been an unusual journey to this place, but it made sense. As anyone who's read Slate knows, I'm a fan of Elizabeth Warren's as a public figure. And I think she would have brought a lot to the ticket. But even as someone who's a fan of hers, I kind of had to admit that this is the choice. I mean, this is the right choice for Biden. The way this race is being run, it's a younger person. It's a person who's obviously very sharp, could jump in. If Biden has a health issue, which is obviously not out of the normal possibility. I think it's someone who's going to give voters confidence in the ticket in a way that Warren may not have, given her that she is on the older side as well. So it made a lot of sense to me. And I have quibbles with Kamala's positions on some things, and I think that as we saw in the primary, she is not entirely as comfortable on the national stage as she was expected to be. But it was like the obvious choice and the right choice. That was my reaction.
Yeah, I've been thinking about there are just many different things that I, as a voter, would want out of a vice presidential candidate, even though vice presidents don't have any real, or they have very little real power.
Yeah.
Was she a good pick as a foil to Biden? Absolutely. She's charismatic, energetic, passionate. Like, if you watch their first appearance together today, the difference between their comfort, even just as a public speaker, was so pronounced. I think Joe Biden maybe used to be a good public speaker, or at least he developed a reputation as somebody who had a winning personality and was charismatic. I don't think he's that anymore at all. Kamala Harris definitely is. I find her, I'm really drawn to her as a personality and as a politician. I love watching her speak. When she takes the fight to somebody, she doesn't miss. Those things do not describe Joe Biden. Is she good to help him get elected? Probably. Like, her weakness during her own campaign was on policy. It felt like she couldn't solidify an actual vision that people could connect to. It was really hard to know how she actually felt about things or what her plans would be. And that doesn't really matter for a vice president, like, she's not the one driving the agenda, which we can talk about this a little bit later, but that makes me a little bit less excited about the possibility of her, bringing something to America in terms of diverse representation. But as far as, people can kind of project whatever they want onto her, because she has a pretty diverse background in terms of the positions she's taken on things, or at least the narrative that she's written about herself. So, Julia, you talked about the discourse that Kamala would provoke. I know there's already been some conversations or like whisperings among the Biden donors and his advisors, Chris Dodd, who was running the search committee, saying that she had no remorse for attacking Biden during the primary. Some of his donors were saying she's too ambitious, only going to be thinking about being president the whole time she's vice president.
Yeah.
Now the discourse, that was before she was even nominated. And now here she is, she's the running mate. What do you foresee for what we can expect from online and IRL discourse?
Those misogynoir-laden comments are going to get worse. That's the short answer. I don't understand why it matters if she's ambitious. I think that became a talking point because she's a woman, particularly she's a woman of color. Even more particularly, she identifies as a Black woman. And we saw the surrounding coverage of all of the women who have run for president. It's, oh my God, like, they're ambitious, they're opportunistic, they're this, they're that. But I mean, it's politics. Why should she feel bad for attacking Biden on a policy position during a presidential debate? That doesn't make any sense to me. And it's not like he wasn't palling around with segregationist. It's like that was a thing that happened.
Yeah, it's really interesting to me now, the fact that he chose her, in spite of the fact that she was the one who burned him the worst during the primary. It almost makes me, I think it reflects well on Joe Biden, to be perfectly honest.
I think that, there was a lot of chatter within the Democratic Party about, particularly when he kind of sealed the nomination, about how he was doing with younger voters. Not a lot of enthusiasm. Bernie Sanders was winning those voters. And so, yeah, maybe you're right. Like, the fact that the kind of most memorable punch at him from that younger perspective, even though Kamala is not necessarily, she's not in her 20s, she's not a younger voter herself, but the person who most forcefully and memorably represented that kind of position so far in this race was Kamala Harris. And maybe that appealed to him strategically as well as, as from a, kind of a personality perspective. I was going to say, the ambition thing I had already forgotten about. That is particularly ridiculous, given that Joe Biden is the person at the top of the ticket. I didn't come into this expecting to be morbid and mention this in both of my first two comments, but he's an older individual. If you don't have someone whose ambition is to be the president in this spot, what are you doing? Mm-hmm. This person has to be ready to be the president, on a minute's notice. And so, to me, that is one of the strongest reasons to pick her for this position. I mean, if you're thinking of just like even like logistically, like who do you want running a meeting in the White House? Like she just like seems like a person who's like running a sharp meeting, you know? So like to me that's like actually one of the best reasons to put her in this spot.
And I think that's what makes her feel like at least a formidable opponent to Trump and Pence. I mean, I can't even compare her to Mike Pence because talk about somebody who lacks a personality. But if you look at the way she's conducted herself and made a name for herself, like this is part of the reason why she's become this rising star in the Democratic Party is the way she conducts herself in the Judiciary Committee hearings, the way she grilled Brett Kavanaugh. Mm-hmm. Like these were moments that drew people into those hearings, people who probably were just watching like a few clips at home or something. Kamala Harris stood out because of the way she was able to speak to issues that a lot of Americans were talking about at home. And like, that's the kind of person who I think she will fulfill that role of the vice president really well in terms of being sort of a mouthpiece for the White House and somebody who can serve as a proxy for concerns of Americans in a way that Joe Biden wouldn't be able to, even if she isn't driving the agenda. But a lot of people were hoping, especially people on the left, that Joe Biden would choose a running mate who could possibly influence him from the left. Do you think Kamala could possibly fulfill that role? Do you think she'll be able to influence Joe Biden? And if she does, how do you think she'll push him?
I'm waiting for Julia to answer that.
And I was waiting on you because I felt like y'all were waiting on me. So, okay, let me break that into a couple pieces.
Please
do. I think Kamala Harris can influence Joe Biden? Yes, I think Kamala Harris could influence anyone. She's brilliant. She's a good politician, strong prosecutorial record. And by strong, I mean like she was an objectively good prosecutor. And this is leading into a conversation about how good a prosecutor can be, obviously, but we'll get there when we get there. As far as her pushing him further left based on what we know of her policies right now, they pretty much share the same politics. I mean, in a lot of ways, she was a safe choice for him. And this was the point of the New York Times piece that came out last night. She was a safe choice. They share the same center-left, moderate politics. They will move further left if they are pushed. Sure. I mean, obviously, they would have to win and get in the White House before we saw how far left they could be pushed. But I mean, in a lot of ways, they share a lot of the same politics. So I'm not quite sure. It's not like he chose Elizabeth Warren, for example. It's not like he chose someone whose politics are very, very different from his.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the right way to put it. I think that Biden is someone, what we know of his public record, that who is open to being influenced. I think if you compare him to Bill or Hillary Clinton, when people talked about those, Bill Clinton's administration, Hillary Clinton's campaign, the way she ran the Department of State, people talked about having a tight circle. And prioritizing loyalty and being a little suspicious of advice other people are giving her, or people who are trying to influence her, or in Bill Clinton's case, him. Whereas you don't really hear that about Biden. I think that a way I kind of tried to wrap my head around it was to think about what Biden was in 2008. Mm-hmm. He was this, kind of like white guy, older white guy politician representing a fairly conservative position in the Democratic Party. He wanted to be president. He's obviously ambitious himself, and he failed like really pretty badly in that Iowa, in those first few months of the campaign, and instead of kind of lashing out and becoming kind of a part of a reactionary caucus within the Democratic Party, trying to kind of beat Obama back, he joined Obama,
Yeah.
And so I don't know whether that means that, I don't know whether that's like personally admirable, but just as a politician, he's not someone who holds grudges, and he's not someone who I think is is going to reject a certain viewpoint, just because it's coming from someone who he hasn't worked with before. But I think, as Julia pointed out, the question is like, where is she going to try to move him? And I'm not sure. I'm not sure we know that yet.
I had originally advocated on the Slate site, slate.com, for Keisha Lance Bottoms, the mayor of Atlanta, because she had been so loyal to Biden from the beginning. And I thought that would make her supremely able to influence him in a way that some of these other people like Kamala Harris would not be able to. And, Keisha Lance Bottoms herself has shown to be receptive to advocates from the left who are, trying to help her grow in her positions. But I think the fact that Joe Biden chose somebody who so brutally roasted him on a public stage is a great sign. Whether Kamala Harris will actually use that influence to move him in a markedly more progressive direction remains to be seen. But our colleague, Jordan Weissman, wrote a great piece this week, I forget if it was yesterday or today, where he outlined a couple ways in which Harris does show promise for progressive policy goals. She's for the legalization of marijuana, which would make a huge difference in terms of, mass incarceration, which people have rightly criticized her as being a sort of punitive executor of when she was a prosecutor in California. And she's also changed in terms of her positions on criminal justice reform, or at least she appears to be open to being held accountable by the left. Or, she wants to be seen as progressive, and she's also changed her policies to be more progressive. So, I think there's reason for people who are criticizing her for those reasons or wondering if she'll be able to move Biden to the left. I think she, at least, is of the moment in a way that Biden isn't. I think without being pushed, he would not keep up with the latest developments in anything, and remaining ingrained in his anecdotes and positions from 1970. But I think Kamala, because she's ambitious, is very up on the latest, what are the young Democrats thinking and talking about. Her work on environmental justice with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is another example of that. Climate change and the environment is a huge issue for young voters. And she's, I think, a great candidate for people who are concerned with that. We have a question from a viewer.
Sorry.
Oh, did you want to say something first?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, as far as her being open to held accountable, I'm very skeptical about that.
All right.
Just because hear me out. Whenever people bring up her record as prosecutor, and they bring up the way she was, like you said, and a pretty punitive executive, and how she was not a progressive prosecutor. There isn't really a lot of openness. She hasn't really sat down and reckoned with that publicly. And I think it's admirable when a politician changes their positions to become a bit more progressive. That's great. But at the same time, when there are constituents who want you to reckon with the poor decisions that you made in the past, and the same goes for Biden and everyone who was around in the early aughts and in the 90s, right? People want them to reckon with these poor decisions that they made, and thus far, she has not really done that.
Yeah,
so
I have seen. I take your point, and you're definitely right. I will say there have been a couple activists, at least trans activists, who I've read who've met with her and talked to her about something she wrote, the moves she made to deny trans healthcare to 2 prisoners when she was Attorney General, which is terrible and something that she absolutely should be held to account for.
Right.
And these activists basically said, she disavows that, she doesn't support that policy. And, she seems like she's trying to make overtures to trans people to say, what are your needs and how can I advance them? As vice president, who knows how much she'll actually do, but I feel like Joe Biden probably doesn't even know any trans people. So I'm excited for her to at least, bring some of that knowledge that she's gained through those overtures that she's made to that administration if they win.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've heard the same thing from Black activists in Los Angeles too. When I was at HuffPost, I did a lot of reporting on this for something that ended up not working out. And a lot of the Black activists there, they said the same thing. In meetings with her, it's great. But I still think that for some, not everyone has the opportunity to sit down and talk with her
Totally.
and see how she's reckoned with it and see how she's changed. So because she is a public figure, I think at least for a good amount of people, they want to see the same things that like me and you are hearing from people who have sat down with her. They want to hear that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it goes back a little bit to her primary campaign and the problems she had in that campaign, because I think, at least from my perspective, it was pretty obvious that she wanted to just roll right out of the gate. And obviously, the killing of George Floyd has really changed the conversation. But even before that, of course, these were still issues that people, it was obvious that criminal justice reform was going to come up in her campaign. And she kind of tried to roll out of the gate as the progressive prosecutor. And it didn't really take. It wasn't seen as credible by voters and by people like us, kind of frankly. And so she had kind of wanted to skip that stage where she does the reckoning. She kind of wanted to it seemed like to me, she kind of wanted to be able to say, hey, I was with you guys all along, instead of having to take that moment and do something that might be a little more personal and more earnest. And that kind of like personal transformation, personal thinking, reckoning, it wasn't her strong suit during the primary. I think other people seemed more credible when they were talking about their own beliefs, or they seemed more authentic. Who knows whether they were, but they seemed more authentic. And I think maybe she'll get better at it. I mean, she's a young politician, and this could be something she realizes. She probably does realize that she should, that she could do a better job of. So maybe we will see that.
I think this is also where the personal and emotional side of politics comes out, because you can vote as many times as you want or propose as many different pieces of legislation as you want, but if you don't actually connect with people on the level of, I understand what you're going through, I did something wrong, they're not going to believe that you can be a credible leader on those issues.
And the flip side of it, though, is that not all of Biden's voters or potential voters think she did anything wrong. Yeah,
totally.
So that's kind of a strategic a pickle for her and Joe Biden to work out. But that is something that might be also
kind of, I think, part of what sunk her campaign is she was like, it's very hard to stake out a ground in the middle on some of those issues when you're either, supposed to apologize for something or exaggerate your record on those same things.
Right.
Yeah.
I did want to correct myself a little bit. Joe Biden is actually pretty tight with Sarah McBride, a trans candidate for state senate in Delaware.
Okay.
So just wanted to, I remembered that, and I couldn't stand having lied on this live stream.
I thought maybe you got a text from Sarah McBride or Joe Biden.
No, I actually, I'm sorry that I perpetuated misinformation. All right, we have a question from a listener. There have been rumors of trolls on social media saying that Kamala called Biden a racist when she actually said, "You're not racist," I assume. How far do you think the Trump administration will go to discredit her and her loyalty to Biden? How far can they go? I think the Trump administration will go as far as they conceivably can. I mean, even in just the past couple of days, there have been, Trump's racism has been getting even more explicit. His campaign has been tweeting out mugshots of Black people who've been released on bail, saying that, Biden released these people, or Biden staff members contributed to a bail fund that released these people who've been alleged of these crimes. A ye old Republican tactic to scare white people. So what do you guys think?
I think that you're right. And I think that this maybe speaks more to my, naivete than anything. But after 5 years of covering Donald Trump, I was actually surprised by, and the right wing, I was actually surprised by how quickly this all went into the gutter. I can hardly even parse what these messages are sometimes because they kind of fundamentally don't make sense. But the kind of instantaneous reaction that the right seemed to have coagulated around was that she's not Black, or she's fake. She maybe wasn't born here. So it just went so far beyond what I could come up with immediately that I think the answer is going to be, of course they're gonna create attacks that are more foul than anyone could imagine.
Yeah, if it wasn't so, gruesome, it would almost be funny, like the right's inability to find a legitimate vein of criticism against somebody who is like a very legitimately criticizable person.
Yeah.
So they automatically just go to like trying to pick apart what her racial identity is. And
maybe one of you can summarize that better for people who haven't been following it, because I did a very inept job of summarizing what that attack was. Although to be fair to me, it's like not a coherent attack, but it's that she's. I think it's the kind of the classic thing of like she was trying to earn points for having a racial identity that she doesn't deserve in some way, which obviously I think is farcical. But I think that would be a way of summarizing it.
Yeah, I don't want to, give too much time to this, like terrible vein of criticism, but I think you summarized it perfectly fine. Speaking of race, so I feel like the conventional wisdom would be that choosing a Black running mate would motivate Black voters to turn out for Biden. I think Black voters obviously don't support Donald Trump. Very few of them do. But in terms of exciting them and motivating them to go to the polls, the campaign almost certainly feels this way. I mean, I looked at Kamala's announcement video for her VP slot, and it showed her interacting with almost exclusively Black voters. But Harris wasn't really popular with Black voters in the primary. Like, she was disproportionately popular among Black voters, but Biden actually, Black voters put him in the lead. And obviously there's a diversity of opinion among Black voters. They're not a monolith. But my question to you guys is, do you think that Harris will have the impact on Black voter turnout that the Biden campaign clearly hopes she'll have?
I mean, truthfully, I don't even really know how to answer that. Just because I mean, Black voters are the most consistent voting bloc, and they vote Democrat. So I feel as though they were going to vote Democrat anyway. So that's why, and I've been thinking about this too in the days leading up when it became very clear that he was going to choose a Black woman, or that it was like a 96% chance that he was going to choose a Black woman. But I don't know how to answer that question just yet, as far as like literal effect on turnout. What I do think is that some people are seeing this as a nod to just the backbone of the Democratic Party, which is Black women. And that's just kind of where I've been. That's what I've been thinking about, because the turnout point, like, I don't know, like that part, I just haven't been able to compute that, considering what the data has already shown.
Yeah. I think the turnout what we know, what it will look like. I mean, interest has been just so high in this election since 2016, like basically since election night. And so, we'll see what the exit polls say. But that problem that Hillary had of like slightly depressed turnout in, I think famously, like Detroit and Milwaukee, like if she had gotten X% better turnout there, she might have won those states, Michigan and Wisconsin. From everything I've seen, not specific even to the Black community, Black voters, it's not like that now. Having Donald Trump as president for 4 years has just activated people in a way that that no candidate could do. And so I'm not sure that is like a big problem for him right now. It just seems like if you look at the 2018 midterms, all sorts of different Democratic candidates got great turnout from all parts of the Democratic coalition. Yeah. Although I thought where you're going with this is a point that one of our colleagues made. I think it was Alicia Montgomery made, is that Kamala in a way is kind of like a white suburban women's candidate, and is going to generate a lot of interest in that demographic, which is one where Biden has already kind of bitten into Trump's 2016 performance.
Wait, why is she a white suburban woman candidate?
I think as you were saying before, like in this moment, like where a lot of white people are having like a reckoning with their own racism and participation in structural racism, like white people are excited to support a Black candidate right now. Like our role in ignoring the Black women who are the backbone of the party, has been something that's come up a lot in the last 4 years, in the last 2 years. And so I think I thought that was an astute point. That's
a great point. And I think she also would represent the point of view that is like pro Black Lives Matter, anti defund the police. Like she rides that line where people can feel like they went to a protest but didn't
throw a brick through the
face public property. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, we've got another question here from Jackson. Since Biden and team spent so much time vetting women for the VP spot, do you think we'll be seeing a lot of them in his cabinet? Goddess willing. I think he vetted a lot of great people for his vice presidential list. It would be hilarious if he chose an all-woman cabinet. I think that would make good on this promise that he made to elevate women in lieu of us actually getting a woman nominee. And I've kind of gone back and forth on how I felt about him kind of making like a reality show gimmick out of his decision, his vice presidential decision, like promising he's going to pick a woman, but you don't know what woman it's going to be, but it could be any woman as long as it's a woman. It's a little bit demeaning and reductive, but also it meant that a lot of women who wouldn't normally get looked at for vice president, like found themselves in the national media. I wouldn't have known so much about Keisha Lance Bottoms had I not written a piece about her because she was on the short list. And I hope that leads to like more women entering the pipeline for things like cabinet positions. More realistically, I think that Joe Biden has surrounded himself, this gimmick aside, that was totally an electability move. I think he has surrounded himself with sort of like the old guard, the, more traditional Democratic establishment, Chris Dodd types. So I wouldn't be surprised if his cabinet was full of those types of people. But what do you guys think?
I agree.
Well, great. Topic
I don't have
settled.
anything to add to that.
No, I think you said it. I think that you're right. Like the biggest beneficial effect of this is going to be that, like, if we're looking at a 2024, 2028 primary, if Biden wins and whenever he decides to hang it up, I think a lot of the people you just mentioned, and you could also mention Stacey Abrams and Gretchen Whitmer, I think those people are going to be in the conversation, and rightfully so. And so, like, it definitely was, again, like, as you said, but like, I think one thing that he or his team did do well was I think they were smart in their choice of whose names to leak, because like it does seem like a pretty strong field. And we talk about like how, like, after Obama, like, the Democratic bench was thin, and I don't think that's true right now. And I think and I think that has a lot to do with this weird reality show. As far as who will be in his cabinet, like, I feel like it's going to be a weird mix, and I don't know whether that'll be good. But like, the thing that I always go back to is that he or someone close to him told Axios that he was considering for Secretary of the Treasury Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, and Elizabeth Warren. Like the two most opposite, probably the two like most possible opposite attitudes towards like finance and regulation of that you could get and still kind of just even be plausibly within the Democratic Party. So like, I think it's a wild card. I think maybe some of these people could be in his cabinet. I think there will definitely be people like that Chris Dodd class of Democrat. Hopefully not Chris Dodd himself, after what we've seen from him in the last month or so. But yeah, I think that it will be quite a stew.
Yeah. I mean, it does feel like the Democratic Party is trying to reconcile with the fact that there's a growing mass of people who want to move the party to the left. I think we've moved on from the days of Nancy Pelosi sort of like bad-mouthing the Squad, and to now like the Squad is actually playing really prominent roles in setting the agenda for the Democratic Party. I don't know how much that's going to affect Joe Biden's cabinet choices, but I have to imagine that it's not nothing. So that's encouraging to me. CT asks, how will the conventions change the race and by how much? Ben, you have said that Kamala Harris is a great on-paper candidate, and this is a race that's going to be run on paper. So I'm going to throw this question to you.
Yeah, I think actually, I mean, I think one thing I learned from watching Biden in the primary, when I actually kind of took a day and just went through like a lot of his appearances and forced myself to watch all of his stump speech a couple times. Like Biden is still a good speech giver. As you mentioned before, like the contrast between him and Kamala on like kind of speaking even remotely, like a little off the cuff, like you can tell that he's not up to his old standards. And I agree with you. Like, I don't think he was ever known as just like a brilliant extemporaneous debater or anything. But like, I think he can still like deliver lines forcefully. And like, I understand, like he was not my choice in the primary, but like, I could understand why people who, go to a Biden event came away thinking, okay, like that guy like represents Democratic values. He represents my values. And I like him. I think Kamala also, as we have been talking about, is like a very good political performer in some settings. And I feel like giving a speech, is certainly one of them. So I feel like this like is a good setup for the Democrats. I feel like Kamala's worst moments in the primary, Biden's worst moments in the primary were very similar when they were asked to explain past positions, and asked to explain their evolution on issues. I think neither of them did that really fluidly. And what I kind of meant by like this election being held on paper is like, there's not going to be a lot of occasions for them to be grilled. Like they're not going to be doing town halls where a person, which those are where the best in like, rudest questions come from, is just like regular people. Cause like, they don't, they say what they think. And so we're not going to have that. We're not going to have like press gaggles on the plane, it's going to be events like this, and so I feel like both Biden and Harris are going to have the chance to be really well prepared for any appearances that they do make, and I think that that will be a strength for her. And so the convention, I feel like the convention is a good format for her. Whether people are going to be watching this weird Zoom convention, I don't know.
It's almost like the whole campaign's going to be a convention. Like everything can kind of be scripted. The audiences will be, well, actually, the conventions usually derive a lot of their power from like the cheering crowd, I guess. There are the powerful speeches, but there are also the people reacting to them. And watching their speech, watching Biden and Harris's speech today, I felt like, God, why is no one clapping? Like I felt uncomfortable watching it, and like, oh, that could have been a real like, heartstring pulling line, but then no one was there to react to it. It's just like the press, like each seated 6 feet apart in their masks, not reacting at all. So to the extent that conventions change anybody's minds or energize people, I feel like they'll do even less of that this year.
And I think
yeah.
I was just going to add that, like, I think the visual of like the Democratic coalition is like that's always a strength for the Democrats.
Yeah.
If you're a Democrat, one thing you like about Democrats is that a lot of people are Democrats.
Yeah.
And that convention is very carefully managed to show that, to emphasize the diversity of the Democratic voting, the voting base, and they don't get the chance to do that this year.
Yeah, and just like being at I mean, y'all have pretty much said it, but I'm thinking about particular moments from the convention, the DNC in 2016, and how like just the way the room erupted when the mothers of the movement were on stage, and the way that the room erupted when Bernie Sanders was just like, yeah, like, boom, it's Hillary, y'all. And so the fact that we don't get those moments is kind of I can see how that would leave people feeling like, womp, aw.
Yeah, insult to injury when everyone's like already sort of at their wits' end with the quarantine and everything, and possibly, unemployment. All right, we are coming up on the end of our time, but I want to give everyone an opportunity for a closing statement. Julia, I know you wrote about Kamala for Slate.com. I really enjoyed reading your piece. So I'm wondering if you can just give us some little snippets of wisdom that you've already committed to the internet.
I think the biggest thing is that whenever there is a first, the media, us in particular, we harp on it. And I say this in the piece, but first do not bear the totality of significance. That is not, they are important, they are worth recognition, they open doors for many people who come after them. But at least for us, we can't stop there. And I'm not worried about voters so much stopping there, because voters, again, particularly those who belong to marginalized groups, they are not stopped. It's just like, this is wonderful. This means something. I have some questions about your record. So I'm not worried about that, but I am worried about the coverage. And I just hope that, as we move forward, it's just not, I just don't want it to be like trash and full of misogynoir and just really harping on the fact that she's the first Black woman to hold this position. And it's like, that's great, but we have to think more critically than that, especially when you have two people on the ticket during this moment where policing and criminal justice were having these major progressive reckonings with these systems. And then you have the writer of the 94 crime bill and a former prosecutor who has not had a very public reckoning with her record. So that's it. Those are my last thoughts.
Yeah. Ben.
I want to note that I had written down, first, do not bear the totality of significance on my own notepad, because I was going to bring that up because I thought that was a great line. And I think that and it speaks to what I was going to mention, which is one thing I kind of gone back to a couple times during this primary and during this race, is thinking about the 2004 primary, the Democratic primary, which was the most recent, I guess, like large free-for-all primary that the Democrats had. Obama and Hillary kind of got narrowed down pretty quickly. But in 2004 was the last time that there was like really like going up to Iowa, like really like a bunch of candidates who were still in it. And that range of candidates for Democratic voters at that time, it went from Howard Dean, and this was perceived as a very big spread, Howard Dean to Joe Lieberman. Every one of the guys was a straight white guy in that race, and that was like your ideological diversity, and your representational diversity. Like if you were a liberal at all, if you had any interest in economic and in social justice, racial justice, like Howard Dean was your guy, and so I think that this field, and Kamala coming out of it as the vice presidential nominee, I don't mean this in like a gauzy, like, hey, we're done, we did it kind of way, but like it really speaks to how big the shift in the Democratic Party has been in like 16 years. It's not a long time. And so I think like if we take a step back for a second and look at it from that perspective, like this is really like a significant moment that this is happening. And I think that I myself, being like so caught up in the kind of day-to-day like campaign strategy, might miss that sometimes. It's a very significant moment. Like the Democratic Party is changing, America is changing. That said, firsts do not bear the totality of significance. Like it remains to be seen, like what exactly this will mean for the actual Democratic agenda. And I'm excited and a little hopeful, I guess, to see what it does.
Yeah. I mean, even thinking back to 3 years ago, Hillary Clinton and Tim Kaine, like I can't imagine the Democratic Party ever having an all-white ticket again. That just 3 years later, that seems unthinkable to me. And, first do not bear the totality of significance, maybe the mantra for me this campaign season. I think Kamala Harris actually is a really good example for people to understand both the limits and the possibilities of representation, where it is incredibly meaningful to have a Black woman on the ticket because, as you said, Julia, of Black women's like long-standing support for work on behalf of and essential role in the Democratic Party, having an HBCU graduate on the ticket, like being an Asian American woman on the ticket, like it actually matters for people to be able to see something like that happening in America, or at least that seeing other people supporting that vision for America. I also think it's, as we've seen in terms of the women that Joe Biden was vetting to be vice president, like even being nominated for vice president is a huge booster in someone's career, not to mention what it will mean to actually have a vice president who's a woman and a woman of color. At the same time, she's Kamala Harris. She, I don't need to reiterate everything we've talked about in terms of her, the reasons why people are suspicious of her. But also she'll be vice president, which doesn't mean that much. Actually, Kate Mann had a great piece in the New York Times called "Women Can Have a Little Power as a Treat." And it's all about how the role of vice president is about being like a helpmeet and serving at the pleasure of the president. Although, he can't really fire a vice president, but, she has to be deferential to him. She's serving his agenda. She doesn't have any executive power. So part of me hopes that it will, if they win, people will get a little bit more used to seeing women, Black women, Asian American women in positions of power. But as vice president, that even that vision of power will be limited, to say nothing of the actual power that she'll wield. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you to everyone who's been watching and for all your great questions. Let's do it again sometime.
Thank you.
I hope you guys have a good night, and thanks everyone for watching.
All right, thanks everybody.
Bye.